The scream tore through the healing chamber, before Lyra even opened her eyes. It was her own scream. She just did not know it yet. Pain lived in her skull like a second heartbeat, pounding behind her eyes, dragging her up out of darkness and into a bright, unfamiliar room. Stone walls, carved wooden beams, the heavy smell of herbs boiling somewhere close. Her body ached in ways she could not explain, and when she tried to sit up, a hand pressed gently against her shoulder. "Easy," a voice said, low, steady, used to being obeyed. "You are safe." Lyra's eyes snapped open and found a man standing over her, tall enough that he blocked most of the light from the window behind him. Dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes the color of amber caught in firelight, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She did not know him. That was the first wrong thing. The second wrong thing came a heartbeat later, when she noticed the way the two guards at the door would not look directly at him, the way a woman near the window bowed her head the moment he turned, the way the very air in the room seemed to bend toward him without him doing anything at all. "Who are you?" Lyra said, not a question really. More of a demand. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe, or something worse. "Lyra," he said carefully, like her name was something fragile in his mouth. "It's me. Kale." The name meant nothing to her. She searched her own mind the way someone searches a familiar room in the dark, hands out, expecting to find furniture that used to be there. Instead, she found gaps, holes, whole years missing like pages torn from a book. The last thing she remembered clearly was running through the border woods on patrol, her chest burning with the effort, the taste of blood in her mouth, and then nothing. A long, empty nothing. And now this room, and this stranger, who said her name like he owned it. "I don't know you," she said. The healer near the window drew in a sharp breath. One of the guards shifted his weight, like he wanted to step forward, and could not decide if it was his place. Kale did not move. He simply looked at her, and for a moment, something raw crossed his features before he smoothed it away, the way a man smooths a blanket over something he does not want seen. "You were attacked," he said instead. 3 days ago, near the eastern ridge. We found you unconscious, badly hurt. The healers have been working on you since then." 3 days, Lyra repeated. Her voice came out thinner than she wanted. "You've been asleep, recovering." He paused. "You don't remember the attack?" It was not a question, but she answered it anyway. "I don't remember a lot of things, apparently." The healer, an older woman with silver threaded through dark hair, stepped closer and pressed careful fingers to the side of Lyra's head, checking something Lyra could not see. "Memory loss after trauma like this is not unusual," the woman said gently. "It can return, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once." "How much am I missing?" Lyra asked. Nobody answered right away, and that silence told her more than words could have. She looked between the healer's careful expression, and the guard's lowered eyes, and Kale's unreadable face, and a cold feeling settled low in her stomach. "How much?" she said again, sharper this time. 3 years, Kale said quietly. "You're missing 3 years." Lyra laughed. It was not a happy sound. 3 years is not a memory gap. 3 years is a different life. "It might feel that way," Kale said. "It doesn't feel like anything," she snapped. "Because I don't remember it. That's the point." She pushed herself further upright despite the ache screaming through her ribs, ignoring the healer's hand trying to ease her back down. She needed to see the room properly, needed to understand where she was, because nothing about this place matched what she remembered of her life. The furniture was too fine. The tapestries on the walls were too rich, deep reds and golds stitched with a crest she did not recognize, a wolf's head circled by flame. "Whose house is this?" she asked. Another pause. Kale's jaw tightened slightly. "This is the royal residence," he said. "You live here." Lyra stared at him. Then she looked at the crest again, at the guards standing at careful attention, at the deference radiating off every person in the room, whenever Kale so much as shifted his weight, and a horrible suspicion started forming. "Royal residence," she repeated slowly. As in mine," Kale said. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Court." For a long moment, nobody in the room breathed. Lyra's first instinct, the one that came from somewhere old and stubborn inside her, was to laugh again, longer this time, because surely this was some kind of joke, some strange dream brought on by fever and pain. But nothing about the healer's face suggested humor. Nothing about the guard's rigid posture suggested exaggeration. And nothing about the way Cale watched her, waiting, bracing himself for her reaction, suggested a lie. "That's not possible," she said finally. "Why not?" Cale asked, and there was something careful in his voice now, something testing. "Because I'm nobody," Lyra said. "I'm a border patrol wolf. I grew up in the outer settlements. I have never even been inside the capital walls, let alone the palace." She gestured at the room around her, at the fine linens beneath her, at the carved wooden headboard behind her. "This isn't my life." "It is now," Cale said, and something in his tone made it clear. This was not the first time he had said something like this to her, that some version of this exact conversation had happened before, long ago, when the difference between her old life and this one was new and strange to both of them. "How?" Lyra demanded. "How does a border patrol wolf end up living in the royal residence, with the Alpha King telling her this is her house?" Cale's throat worked like he was choosing his next words with great care. "You're my mate," he said finally. "We've been mated for 2 years. Married for 1. The room tilted sideways, or maybe it was just Lyra's stomach doing that, some sick lurching feeling that made her grip the edge of the bed to steady herself. "No," she said. "Lyra." "No," she said again, louder. "I don't have a mate. I would know. Something like that. You would feel, wouldn't you? The bond, the—" She stopped, because even as she said it, some traitorous part of her body was reacting to him, some low hum beneath her skin, that she could not explain, and refused to acknowledge. She shoved the feeling down hard. "I don't know you," she said instead, quieter now, more insistent. "Whatever we were, whatever happened in those 3 years, I don't remember any of it. As far as I know, I woke up this morning, and there is a stranger standing over my bed, acting like he has some claim on me." She saw it land, saw the flicker of hurt cross his face, before he schooled it back into something calm and composed, something fit for a king. "I understand this is difficult," he said, and his voice had gone formal now, careful, the warmth from a moment ago tucked away somewhere she could not reach. "The healers say your memory may return with time. Until then, I will not force anything on you that you do not want." "Good," Lyra said, "because I don't want any of it. Whatever this is, I want to go home." Something shifted in the room at that, a ripple of unease passing between the healer and the guards, quick glances exchanged that Lyra was clearly not meant to catch. "This is your home," Cale said carefully. "It's a palace I don't recognize, with a man I don't know, in a court I've apparently never set foot in before, in a life that isn't the one I remember living," Lyra said. "None of this is my home." Cale's expression did something complicated then, something that looked almost like grief, quickly buried. "The healers need to examine you further," he said instead of arguing. "I'll leave you to rest." He turned toward the door, and Lyra watched him go, watched the careful, controlled way he moved, like a man holding something very heavy, very still, so it would not spill. At the threshold he paused. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "you were happy here. Before this happened, I know that must be hard to believe right now, but it's true." Then he was gone, and the door closed with a soft final click, and Lyra was left alone with the healer and the guards, and the terrible hollow feeling of being a stranger inside her own skin. The healer, whose name Lyra learned was Dara, stayed behind to check her wounds properly once the room had emptied of guards. Dara worked with gentle, practiced hands, murmuring reassurances that meant little to Lyra, who was still trying to make sense of the crest on the wall, the fine sheets, the ache in her chest that had nothing to do with her injuries. "He seems," Lyra started, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Kind," Dara offered. "Fair." The court did not expect that from him, when he first took the throne. His father was not a gentle ruler. She smoothed a bandage against Lyra's ribs with careful fingers. "You changed him, or so people say." "I don't remember changing anyone," Lyra said. "No," Dara agreed. "I imagine you don't." Lyra looked down at her own hands, unfamiliar in their stillness. No scars from patrol duty that she could see. No calluses from the rope work she used to do along the eastern fence lines. Her body had grown soft in ways her memory insisted it should not have. 3 years of a life she could not access had reshaped her without her permission, and she hated it, hated the gap, hated the way everyone in this palace seemed to know a version of her that felt like a stranger wearing her face. What was I like, she found herself asking, before, as his mate, as whatever I apparently became here? Dara considered the question longer than Lyra expected. Sharp, she said finally. You never let him forget you were not born to this life. Half the court adored you for it, the other half never quite forgave you. And him? Did he forgive me for it? Something almost like a smile touched the corner of Dara's mouth. He fell in love with you for it, she said. From what I understand, you were the only person in this entire palace who ever spoke to him like he was a man instead of a crown. Lyra turned that over in her mind, trying to find some echo of it inside herself, some flicker of memory or feeling that matched the story Dara was describing. She found nothing, only the same stubborn instinct that had carried her through every hard season on the border, the instinct that said trust nothing you cannot verify yourself, especially not comfortable stories told by people who benefit from you believing them. I want to see where I've been living, she said. The rooms, my things, anything that might help me remember. Dara hesitated, glancing toward the door, as though weighing whether this was her decision to make. I can arrange that, she said finally. Rest first. Your body needs time before your mind can do the harder work of remembering. But rest did not come easily. Lyra lay in the unfamiliar bed, long after Dara left, staring up at carved beams. She had apparently fallen asleep beneath 1,000 times before, and felt nothing but the cold, unsettling sense of trespassing in her own life. Somewhere beyond the door, she could hear low voices, urgent and hushed, one of them unmistakably Kale's. She could not make out the words, only the tone, tight and controlled, in a way that suggested a man working very hard to hold himself together in front of people who expected their king to never show a crack. She thought about what Dara had said, that she had been the only one who spoke to him like a man instead of a crown. Lyra did not remember loving him. She did not remember marrying him, or bonding with him, or building whatever life apparently existed between them across 3 vanished years. But some old habit, some instinct buried deeper than memory, made her certain of one thing. Whoever she used to be, in whatever life she had lived here, she had clearly never been afraid of him. And waking up now, memory gone, everything unfamiliar, she found she still was not. The realization should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, lying alone in a bed that belonged to a woman she no longer recognized, Lyra felt something small and stubborn settle into place inside her chest. Whatever this life had been, whatever role she had played inside these walls, she was not going to simply accept it because a room full of strangers told her it was true. If she was going to reclaim anything from these missing years, she would do it on her own terms, the same way, apparently, she always had. Outside her door, the voices fell silent. A moment later, soft footsteps retreated down the hall, and the palace settled into a heavy, waiting quiet, as though it too understood that nothing about the coming days would be simple. Lyra closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to think, turning the day's impossible truths over and over in her mind, searching for some thread she could pull that might finally make sense of the life she had apparently lost, and the man who claimed to be at the center of it. Morning arrived with a soft knock and the smell of warm bread, and for one confused moment, Lyra forgot where she was. Then the ache in her ribs reminded her, and the strange room came rushing back, and with it, the entire impossible conversation from the day before. A young woman entered carrying a tray, her eyes widening slightly when she saw Lyra was already awake. "My queen," she said, dipping her head. "I brought breakfast." "My queen," Lyra repeated flatly. "Right, that's a title I apparently have now." The woman's eyes flicked up, uncertain, clearly unsure how to respond to a queen who did not seem to want the word applied to her. "Shall I set it here?" "Yes, thank you." Lyra watched the woman arrange the tray with careful, practiced motions, the kind that came from long familiarity, and felt another wave of that same disorienting strangeness. This girl knew her habits, her preferences, probably her favorite foods, and Lyra knew nothing about her at all. "What's your name?" Lyra asked. "Nadia, my queen. Nadia. How long have you worked here?" "Since before you arrived," Nadia said, then seemed to catch herself, unsure if that was the wrong thing to say. "I mean, since before you and the king were mated." "It's fine," Lyra said. "I'd rather people just talk to me plainly. I clearly don't remember the version of me who expects otherwise." Something in Nadia's expression softened at that, a flicker of genuine sympathy replacing the careful formality. "It must be strange," she said, "waking up to all of this." "Strange doesn't begin to cover it," Lyra said. She ate slowly, mostly to give her hands something to do while her mind worked through the previous day. At some point, footsteps approached the door, familiar in their weight and rhythm, even though she had only heard them once before, and Lyra found herself straightening without meaning to. Kale entered without knocking, though he paused just past the threshold as though remembering, mid-step, that perhaps he should have. "May I come in?" he asked, somewhat late for the question. "You're already in," Lyra said. A ghost of something crossed his face, not quite a smile. Fair enough. He looked different in the morning light than he had the day before, less like a king, carved from stone, and more like a man who had not slept much. Shadows sat beneath his eyes. His jaw carried the faint roughness of someone who had not bothered with a razor. "You didn't sleep," Lyra observed. "Not much," he admitted. "Because of me." "Because of a great many things," he said, though the way his gaze dropped briefly told her that was not the whole truth. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Confused. Sore. Surrounded by people who seem to know a version of me I have no memory of being." She set down her cup. "So, about the same as yesterday." Kale pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat, close enough that she could see the tension held tightly in his shoulders, the careful way he kept his hands still in his lap, as though not trusting them not to reach for her. "The healers believe your memory may return gradually, sometimes triggered by familiar places, familiar routines. I thought, if you're willing, I could show you around the palace today. Nothing overwhelming. Just enough that something might feel familiar." Lyra studied him, weighing the offer. Part of her wanted to refuse simply on principle, to prove that she was not some fragile thing to be managed and guided through her own supposed life. But another part, quieter and more practical, recognized that sitting alone in this unfamiliar room accomplished nothing. "Fine," she said, "show me." He looked briefly surprised by how easily she agreed, then recovered, standing and offering a hand to help her from the bed. Lyra looked at the offered hand for a long moment before ignoring it and pushing herself upright on her own, biting back a wince as her ribs protested. "I can manage," she said, mostly to herself. Something almost like amusement flickered across Kale's face, quickly hidden. "Of course," he said. "You always could." The palace, once she was walking through it, under her own power, proved larger and more elaborate than Lyra had imagined, from the confines of her room. Long corridors stretched in every direction, lined with tapestries, depicting battles and hunts and coronations she did not recognize. Servants moved briskly along the edges of hallways, careful never to walk directly through the center where Kale passed, and every single one of them dipped their heads at the sight of Lyra beside him. "They all know me," she murmured. "Everyone here knows their queen," Kale said. "That's not what I meant." Lyra watched a passing servant's eyes widen slightly at the sight of her walking unsteadily, clearly recalculating something in real time. "I mean, they know something about me that I don't have access to. It's like watching people react to a stranger wearing my face." Kale slowed his steps to match her uneven pace, close enough that she caught the scent of him, something like cedar and rain that stirred an odd, wordless recognition somewhere beneath her ribs. She pushed the feeling down, annoyed at her own body's willingness to respond to a man her mind insisted was a stranger. They passed through a long gallery lined with portraits, and Kale paused before one near the end, a painting of the two of them standing together in formal court dress. Lyra's chin lifted in an expression that looked distinctly unimpressed by the grandeur around her. "That was painted last winter," Kale said. "You hated sitting for it, complained the whole time that it was a waste of good daylight." Lyra studied the painted version of herself, searching the confident set of her shoulders, the sharp look in her painted eyes, trying to find some echo of familiarity. There was none. It was like looking at a stranger, who happened to share her face. "I don't feel like her," Lyra admitted quietly. "You don't have to, yet," Kale said. "Give it time." They continued through the palace, Kale narrating pieces of the life she had apparently built here, careful not to overwhelm her with too much at once. He showed her the small library where she liked to read in the mornings, the garden courtyard where she had once insisted on planting flowers from her home settlement, despite the head gardener's objections, the training yard, where, according to Kale, she still sparred occasionally with the palace guards, despite her new position, refusing to let her old skills go soft. Each detail landed somewhere between fascinating and unbearable. Fascinating because it painted a picture of a woman who sounded, in fragments, like someone Lyra might actually like. Unbearable because none of it felt like hers. "Did I love it here?" Lyra asked eventually, as they stood in the training yard, watching two guards spar half-heartedly, clearly distracted by the presence of their king and his uncertain queen. Kale considered the question seriously before answering. "I think you loved parts of it," he said. "I don't think you ever stopped missing the border settlements. You used to say the palace felt like a beautiful cage some days." "That sounds like something I would say," Lyra admitted, and something in the observation startled her, the first small thread of recognition she had felt since waking. Not a memory exactly, more like recognizing her own voice in someone else's description of her. Kale noticed the shift in her expression immediately. "What is it?" "Nothing," Lyra said. "Just that sounded like me. Like actually me, not some stranger's version of me." Something in Kale's face brightened, hope flickering there before he carefully controlled it, unwilling to push too hard. "That's good," he said simply. "That's a start." They continued walking, and slowly, piece by piece, Kale told her more, careful and patient, in a way that surprised her given everything Dara had said about his father's harsh reputation. He told her about the day they met, when she had wandered too close to the palace boundary chasing an escaped hunting hound, and ended up nearly shouting at him before realizing who he was. He told her about the long months of courtship that followed, how she had refused every gift he offered out of stubborn pride, how she had only agreed to the bond once she was certain it was not simply duty pulling him toward her. "You made me work for it," Kale said, and there was real warmth in his voice now, the careful formality from the day before slowly melting away. "Nobody had ever done that before. Everyone else in my life either feared me or wanted something from me. You were the only one who just wanted me to be honest." Lyra listened to all of it with a strange, distant feeling, like hearing a story about someone else entirely, someone she was somehow supposed to become again. She did not know how to feel about a version of herself she could not access, a life built entirely on trust and love she had no memory of choosing. "What if it doesn't come back?" she asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been sitting at the edge of her thoughts since the moment she woke. "What if those 3 years are just gone?" Kale was quiet for a long moment, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Then we start again," he said finally. "I fell in love with you once without any of this. I can do it again, if that's what it takes." The simplicity of the statement, the quiet certainty in it, unsettled her more than any grand declaration could have. She did not know this man. She did not remember choosing him, marrying him, building whatever life the palace insisted she had built. But standing there in the training yard, with the afternoon sun slanting across the stone, and his steady amber eyes fixed on her face, Lyra felt, for the very first time since waking, something that was not quite fear. It was closer to curiosity. And curiosity, she suspected, might be a far more dangerous thing than she was ready to admit. The summons came 3 days later, delivered by a nervous young messenger who explained that the Queen's presence was requested in the Great Hall for the evening court session. Lyra had barely left her private wing since waking, spending most of her time absorbing fragments of a life that still refused to feel like her own, and the idea of appearing before a room full of nobles who all apparently knew her intimately made something cold settle in her stomach. "Do I have to go?" she asked Dara, who had come to check her healing ribs and found herself unexpectedly recruited into a conversation about court politics. "It would be unusual for you not to," Dara said carefully. "The court has heard rumors of your injury and your memory loss. If you don't appear, the whispers will only grow louder." "Let them whisper." Dara's expression turned serious. "Some of those whispering are not simply curious, my queen. There are factions in this court who have never fully accepted an outsider becoming queen. Your absence would be read as weakness, and weakness invites challenge." Lyra turned that over in her mind, unhappy but understanding the logic. Whatever gaps existed in her memory, Some old instinct recognized the shape of danger when it was described to her plainly. "Fine," she said. "I'll go." She dressed carefully that evening, in a deep green gown Nadia insisted had always been one of her favorites, though it felt foreign against her skin. Too fine, too formal, nothing like the practical leathers she remembered wearing on border patrol. When Cale arrived to escort her, he paused in the doorway, something flickering across his face at the sight of her. "You look like yourself," he said quietly. "More than you have since you woke." "I don't feel like myself," Lyra admitted, "but thank you, I suppose." The walk to the Great Hall felt longer than it should have. Cale kept close beside her, his presence a steady, warm weight against the anxious churning in her stomach, though she was careful not to lean into it, not to let herself depend on a stranger's comfort even if that stranger apparently held every claim to her heart. The Great Hall, when they entered, was already full. Nobles in rich fabrics, clustered in small groups, that fell silent, and turned to watch, as Cale and Lyra crossed the polished floor, toward the raised dais at the far end. Lyra felt dozens of eyes tracking her every step, evaluating, judging, some curious and some openly skeptical. She took her seat beside Cale on the smaller of two thrones, forcing her spine straight despite the ache still lingering in her ribs, refusing to let this room full of strangers see anything resembling weakness. The court session proceeded through a series of dull administrative matters, land disputes and trade agreements and requests for royal favor that meant little to Lyra, who spent most of the time simply observing, trying to read the room, trying to understand the currents moving beneath the polite surface of court etiquette. She noticed a cluster of nobles near the eastern wall, who watched her with particular intensity, whispering behind careful hands whenever her attention drifted elsewhere. It was near the end of the session when the trouble began. A tall, broad-shouldered noble stepped forward from that same eastern cluster, bowing with exaggerated formality, before addressing Cale directly. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "The court has heard troubling rumors regarding the Queen's condition. Perhaps it would ease everyone's concerns if she addressed the matter herself." Lyra recognized the challenge dressed up as politeness immediately, some old instinct sharpening inside her at the tone, the deliberate way the man had phrased his request to sound helpful, while clearly setting a trap. "There's no need for that, Garrett," Cale said, his voice carrying an edge of warning that Lyra had not heard from him before. But Lyra, tired of being managed, tired of people speaking around her instead of to her, rose from her seat before Cale could finish deflecting the challenge on her behalf. "It's fine," she said. "I can speak for myself." She saw the surprise flicker across Cale's face, quickly masked, and felt the weight of the entire hall's attention shift fully onto her. "I was injured 3 days ago near the eastern ridge," she said clearly, projecting her voice the way she had learned to during years of shouting orders across border patrol lines. "The attack left me with memory loss covering the last 3 years. I don't remember most of what has happened in this court during that time. I am recovering. That's the full truth of it, and there's no rumor left to spread beyond what I've just told you." A ripple of murmurs moved through the hall, some impressed by her bluntness, others clearly hoping for something more scandalous to feed on. Garrett's expression twisted into something almost pitying, though Lyra recognized the performance for what it was. "How unfortunate," he said, "for a queen to forget her own kingdom. One wonders how she can be trusted to advise the king on matters she cannot even remember agreeing to in the first place." The insult landed cleanly, and Lyra felt heat rise up her neck, old instincts flaring hot beneath her skin. Before she could stop herself, before the careful, diplomatic part of her brain could intervene, she took a step forward. "I might not remember the last 3 years," she said, her voice dropping into something low and dangerous, "but I remember enough to recognize a man trying to use my injury to score points in front of a room full of people too polite to call him out on it." Garrett's smile faltered slightly, though he recovered quickly. "I meant no disrespect, my queen. Simply concern for the stability of the crown." "Your concern sounds a great deal like an insult wearing careful words," Lyra said. "I might not remember this court, but I remember exactly what it feels like when someone is testing whether I'll bite." The room had gone utterly silent now, every noble present holding their breath, waiting to see how this would unfold. Beside her, Cale had gone very still, watching her with an expression Lyra could not fully read, somewhere between alarm and something that looked almost like awe. Garrett's jaw tightened, clearly unhappy at being called out so directly in front of the full court. "Perhaps," he said, his tone shifting subtly, carrying a faint growl beneath the words now, a use of authority, meant to remind everyone present exactly whose bloodline he descended from. The queen should remember her place before addressing a member of this court so directly. It was a mistake, and Lyra felt it the moment the low, commanding pressure of his tone rolled toward her, an old and instinctive challenge, meant to make lesser wolves lower their eyes and step back. She did not lower her eyes. Something ancient and stubborn rose up inside her instead, an instinct from a lifetime spent standing her ground on the border where hesitation got you killed, and before she could stop herself, before 3 years of forgotten palace etiquette could intervene, Lyra answered the challenge the only way her body knew how. A low, warning growl rolled out of her chest, sharp and unmistakable, cutting straight through the tension of the hall, and silencing every whisper in an instant. The entire court froze. Growling back at a challenge from a noble was one thing. Growling in a tone that carried real authority, real weight, was something else entirely. Something that should have been impossible for anyone who was not herself born to command. Lyra watched Garrett's face drain of color as the sound settled over him, watched his shoulders instinctively curl inward before he caught himself, horrified at his own reaction. Beside her, Cale had gone rigid, his amber eyes wide with something that looked almost like disbelief, though beneath the shock, Lyra could have sworn she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, fighting against a smile he clearly knew better than to let show in front of the court. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. The silence stretched long enough that Lyra began to wonder if she had made some terrible, unforgivable mistake, if growling at a noble in open court was the kind of offense that carried real consequences even for a queen. Then Cale rose slowly from his throne, and the entire hall's attention snapped instantly toward him instead. "I believe," he said, his voice carrying easily through the silence, deceptively calm, "that answers the court's concerns about my mate's condition rather thoroughly." A few scattered nervous laughs rippled through the room, breaking the unbearable tension, though Garrett's expression remained tight and humiliated as he bowed stiffly and retreated back toward the eastern wall without another word. Lyra stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, adrenaline still humming beneath her skin, only slowly becoming aware of just how much attention had turned toward her, curious and startled and, in more than a few cases, openly impressed. Cale leaned close as the court session resumed its ordinary rhythm around them, his voice pitched low enough for only her to hear. "That," he murmured, "was either the most reckless thing I've seen since you woke up, or the most familiar." "Which one do you think it was?" Lyra asked, still catching her breath. "Honestly," Cale said, and this time he did let the smile show, small and genuine, and warmer than anything she had seen from him yet. "I think it was both." By morning, the story of the queen's growl had spread through every corner of the palace, passed from servant to servant, guard to guard, noble to noble, growing slightly more dramatic with each retelling. By the time Lyra sat down to break her fast, Nadia was already humming, with barely contained excitement, as she arranged the morning tray. "They're saying you silenced the entire eastern wall, without raising your voice above a whisper," Nadia said, clearly delighted by the exaggeration. "I raised my voice plenty," Lyra said dryly. "There was nothing quiet about it. The kitchen staff are calling you the she-wolf, who forgot her manners but never forgot her spine," Nadia continued, grinning. "I think it's meant as a compliment." "I'll take it as one," Lyra said, though privately she was still turning over the strangeness of what had happened, the way her body had reacted instinctively, powerfully, in a manner that should not have been possible for someone who had grown up nowhere near royal bloodlines. The question followed her through the morning, nagging and persistent, until she finally brought it to Dara during her regular check on Lyra's healing wounds. "How is that even possible?" Lyra asked, once Dara had finished her examination. "Growling like that, with that kind of weight behind it. I wasn't born into an alpha line. I grew up in the border settlements. My family were ordinary patrol wolves, nothing more." Dara considered the question with the careful thoughtfulness Lyra had come to expect from her. "The mating bond can do strange things," she said finally. "When a wolf bonds deeply enough with an alpha, over time, some of that authority can transfer, particularly if the bond is strong, and the years together are many. It is not common, but it is not unheard of either. So somewhere in those 3 missing years, I became something I wasn't before." "In a manner of speaking," Dara said, "though I would say it is less that you became something new, and more that the bond revealed something that was always inside you. Authority like that does not simply appear from nothing. It requires a strength of will already present in the person. Lyra sat with that thought for a long while after Dara left, turning it over uneasily. The idea that she had always carried some seed of that strength inside her, long before the palace, or the bond, or any of the strange turns her forgotten life had taken, felt both reassuring and unsettling in equal measure. Reassuring because it meant whatever authority she had shown in the hall belonged to her, not simply borrowed from Kale. Unsettling because it meant the woman she used to be, the border patrol wolf with the sharp tongue and stubborn pride, had always contained the seeds of the queen everyone here insisted she had become. The rest of the day passed in a haze of small palace routines, meals and walks through the gardens and quiet hours spent in the library trying to find some thread of familiarity in the books stacked along its shelves. Kale found her there in the late afternoon, settling into the chair across from hers with the careful, deliberate movements of a man, trying not to startle a skittish animal. "The court is talking about nothing else today," he said. "So I've heard," Lyra replied, not looking up from the book she was pretending to read. "Garrett has requested a private audience," Kale continued, "to apologize, apparently, though I suspect the apology will be more about damage control than genuine remorse. Do you want me there for it?" "Only if you want to be," Kale said. "I won't force you into any more court situations than necessary, while you're still healing." Lyra finally looked up from the book, studying him for a long moment. "Why didn't you step in?" she asked. "Last night, when Garrett challenged me, you could have shut him down before I even had the chance to respond." Kale's expression turned thoughtful, weighing his answer carefully. "Because you didn't need me to," he said finally. "And because the version of you I remember would never have forgiven me for taking that choice away from her, memory or not." The answer settled something uneasy in her chest, some old worry she had not fully articulated even to herself, the fear that this strange new life might demand she become smaller, quieter, more dependent than the woman she remembered being. Kale's answer suggested otherwise, and something in her allowed itself to relax slightly at the realization. "Tell me about Garrett," she said instead. "What's his history with you?" "His family has opposed my rule since before I took the throne," Kale said. "They believe the crown should have passed to a different branch of the bloodline, one with less foreign blood, and, in their eyes, a more traditional temperament. My father kept them in check through fear. I've tried a different approach, though I suspect Garrett reads my patience as weakness rather than restraint." "And me? Where do I fit into his objections?" "You're the perfect target for everything he already resents," Kale said. "An outsider who married into the throne, who has my ear and my heart in equal measure, who represents everything his family fears about the direction of this court. Your memory loss gave him an opening he thought he could exploit. He was wrong about that." "Clearly," Kale said, and this time, the smile that touched his mouth carried real warmth, unguarded in a way she had not yet seen from him. "Though I imagine he'll try again, in some other form. Men like Garrett rarely learn from a single lesson." Lyra closed the book in her lap, considering everything Kale had told her. "I want to understand this court properly," she said. "Not just the parts you think I'm ready for. All of it. If people are going to test me, I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Something shifted in Kale's expression, respect, and something warmer mixing together as he studied her. "That sounds like something the old you would have said," he observed. "Maybe some things don't need memory to stay true," Lyra said, surprising herself with the admission. Over the following days, Kale made good on her request, spending hours walking her through the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that shaped the northern court. He told her about the eastern nobles, Garrett's faction chief among them, who resented his rule and watched constantly for weakness to exploit. He told her about the southern families, more loyal to the crown but easily swayed by whichever direction seemed to be winning at any given moment. He told her about the small circle of advisors he genuinely trusted, people whose counsel had helped shape his reign into something fairer than his father's had ever been. Piece by piece, Lyra began building a working knowledge of the world she had woken up into, even without the memories that should have accompanied it. She found herself asking sharp, pointed questions during these lessons, questions that made Kale pause thoughtfully before answering, questions that occasionally made him laugh, in a way that suggested she was echoing exactly the kind of curiosity the old Lyra had always shown. You ask questions like you're preparing for a fight, Cale observed one evening, as they sat together in the small library, the fire crackling low in the hearth beside them. Aren't I? Lyra said. Garrett isn't going to be the last person who tests me. If I'm going to hold whatever position I apparently hold in this court, I'd rather understand the battlefield than stumble through it blind. That's exactly what you said 3 years ago, Cale said quietly, almost word for word. Lyra felt something warm and strange settle in her chest at that, some quiet reassurance that whoever she had become in those missing years had not been erased entirely, that fragments of that woman still lived somewhere inside her, resurfacing in small, unexpected moments even without the memories to explain them. Maybe I'm not as lost as I thought, she said softly. Maybe not, Cale agreed, and for the first time since she had woken in that unfamiliar bed, the silence between them felt less like the distance between strangers, and more like the comfortable quiet of two people, slowly, carefully, finding their way back toward each other. A week into her recovery, Lyra insisted on visiting the training yard properly, tired of watching from the sidelines while her body slowly regained its strength. Cale had been reluctant at first, worried about her still healing ribs, but she had pushed back with enough stubborn insistence that he eventually relented, on the condition that Dara approved and a healer remained nearby. The moment she picked up a practice blade, something in her shifted. Her hands remembered even when her mind did not, muscle memory guiding her through familiar stances and movements that felt more natural than anything else since she had woken. The guards assigned to train with her seemed surprised by her skill, murmuring among themselves as she moved through drills with confident, practiced ease. You've always been better with a blade than most of my personal guard, Cale said, watching from the edge of the yard with arms crossed, though his eyes carried open admiration rather than surprise. This feels right, Lyra admitted, lowering the practice blade and catching her breath. More right than anything else has since I woke up. Your body remembers even when your mind doesn't, Cale said. That's not unusual, from what the healers tell me. Physical memory sometimes runs deeper than the kind stored in words and images. Lyra turned the practice blade over in her hands, studying the familiar weight of it, the worn leather grip that fit her palm perfectly. Did I train here often? She asked. Before. Nearly every morning, Cale said. You said it helped you feel like yourself, even after everything changed. Even after you became queen. Something about that struck a chord deep inside her, some quiet truth she recognized instantly as fitting the shape of who she was. Memory or not, she was not built for a life of idle comfort, dressed in fine gowns and confined to gardens and libraries. Whatever she had become in these missing years, some core part of her had clearly refused to let go of the woman she used to be. They sparred together after that, carefully at first given her healing injuries, though the careful pace gradually gave way to something more genuine, as Lyra's confidence grew. She found herself matching Cale's movements with an ease that surprised them both, blocking and countering with instincts that felt older than any memory she currently possessed. You're not holding back, Cale observed, breathing slightly harder than before, clearly pleased despite the exertion. Neither are you, Lyra shot back, deflecting his next strike with practiced efficiency. They continued for nearly an hour, the training yard slowly filling with a small audience of curious guards and servants who paused their duties to watch the queen spar with her king. Something about the sight clearly capturing the imagination of everyone present. By the time they finally stopped, both breathing hard and sweating despite the cool afternoon air, Lyra felt more like herself than she had since waking in that unfamiliar bed. Thank you, she said quietly, as they walked back toward the palace afterward, for not treating me like something fragile. I learned a long time ago that trying to protect you from yourself never worked, Cale said, a fond exasperation coloring his voice. You'd only find some other way to prove me wrong. That sounds exhausting for you. It was, Cale said, and then, after a pause, added more quietly, it still is, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. The words settled between them, warm and quiet, and Lyra found herself studying his profile as they walked, searching for something she could not quite name. Whatever this man was to her, husband and mate and king all wrapped into one confusing package, some part of her was slowly, carefully beginning to trust the shape of him, even without the memories that should have made that trust automatic. That evening, word arrived that shattered the fragile peace of the past week. A messenger arrived breathless and pale, delivering news that a border settlement near the eastern ridge, the same region where Lyra had been attacked, had come under a new assault. Several patrol wolves had been injured. The attackers, according to early reports, had vanished into the forest before reinforcements could arrive, leaving behind only confusion and fear. Cale's expression darkened as he read the full report, his jaw tightening in a way Lyra had not yet seen from him. "This is connected to what happened to me," she said, watching his face carefully. "Isn't it?" "I don't know yet," Cale admitted. "But the timing is difficult to ignore." "Who would want to attack the border settlements?" Lyra asked. "And why would they target me specifically, if that's what happened?" Cale was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to share. "There have been rumors for months," he said finally, "of a faction operating in the Northern Territories, wolves who reject the current balance of power between the courts. Some believe they're being funded by parties within our own borders, nobles who would benefit from instability." "Garrett," Lyra said immediately. "Possibly," Cale said, "though I have no proof yet linking him directly. Suspicion isn't evidence, and accusing a noble of this magnitude without proof would only deepen the divisions I've spent years trying to heal." Lyra felt the weight of the situation settle heavily in her chest, the sudden realization that her attack, her memory loss, everything that had upended her life over the past week, might be part of something far larger and more dangerous than a simple accident. "I need to go to the border settlement," she said. "See the injured wolves myself. Maybe something there will help me remember what actually happened to me." "Lyra, I'm not asking permission," she said, though not unkindly. "I need answers, and sitting in the palace, waiting for someone else to find them, isn't going to satisfy that need." Cale studied her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his amber eyes, torn between protective instinct and clear recognition that arguing with her would accomplish nothing. "Then I'm coming with you," he said finally. "I wouldn't have expected anything less," Lyra said, and for the first time since waking into this strange, unfamiliar life, she felt something solid form between them, a shared purpose that did not require memory to feel entirely real. They departed at first light the following morning, a small escort of trusted guards accompanying them toward the eastern ridge, the same stretch of border territory where Lyra's old life had apparently ended and this strange new one had begun. As the palace disappeared behind them and the wild, familiar landscape of the border settlements opened up ahead, something in Lyra's chest loosened slightly, some old tension releasing at the sight of open sky and rough terrain that felt infinitely more familiar than any palace hallway ever could. Whatever answers waited for her at the border, she suspected they would change everything all over again. The Eastern Ridge settlement looked smaller than Lyra had pictured it, a cluster of modest wooden homes nestled against a steep tree line, smoke curling from chimneys into a gray morning sky. The moment their party arrived, the settlement's small population gathered cautiously to greet them, curiosity and wariness mixing on every face. An older man with weathered features and a slight limp stepped forward to greet Cale with a respectful bow, before his eyes landed on Lyra, widening with something like relief. "Your Majesty," he said, addressing Cale first, before turning fully toward Lyra. "My queen, we heard rumors you had been badly hurt. It's good to see you standing." "You know me," Lyra said, studying his face for any flicker of recognition she might grasp onto. "Everyone here knows you," the man said, sounding faintly surprised by the question. "You grew up 2 settlements over, but you used to visit here often, back before you were queen. Wren. My name is Wren. My daughter used to train alongside you." The name meant nothing to her, though something about the man's weathered, kind face tugged faintly at some buried instinct she could not quite articulate. "I'm sorry," she said honestly. "I don't remember. I lost the last 3 years." Wren's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "That's a hard thing," he said. "But your body remembers this place, even if your mind doesn't yet. I can see it in the way you're standing." Lyra glanced down at herself, surprised to realize her posture had shifted unconsciously since arriving, shoulders relaxing, weight settling more naturally onto the balls of her feet, the way it always had during her years on border patrol. Wren was right. Something in this landscape, this rough, practical, unglamorous place, fit her in a way the palace never quite had. They were led to the small building serving as the settlement's healing house, where several injured patrol wolves rested under the care of a local healer. Lyra moved among them carefully, listening as each described the attack in halting, uncertain detail. They came from the deep woods, one young wolf explained, wincing as the healer checked a bandage wrapped around his shoulder. Fast. Coordinated, not like any wild pack I've seen before. They knew exactly where our weak points were. Did you see their faces? Kale asked. Some, the young wolf said. Strangers, not from any settlement I recognize. But one of them, he hesitated, glancing uncertainly toward Lyra. One of them mentioned your name, my queen, before they retreated. Lyra felt a cold chill move through her. What did he say? Something about unfinished business, the wolf said. I didn't understand it fully. It happened fast. Kale's expression had gone carefully blank, the particular stillness she was learning to recognize as barely controlled anger. This confirms it, he said quietly, once they had stepped outside the healing house, out of earshot of the recovering wolves. Whatever happened to you at the border ridge, it wasn't a random attack. Someone targeted you deliberately, and now they're returning to finish whatever they started. But why? Lyra asked. What could I possibly represent that's worth this kind of effort? I don't know, Kale admitted, but I intend to find out. They spent the remainder of the day walking the border territory, Lyra absorbing the familiar rhythms of settlement life, the practical routines of patrol and farming, and simple community that felt infinitely more natural to her than palace formality ever had. Small fragments continued surfacing throughout the day, not full memories exactly, but flickers of recognition, the particular way certain paths wound through the trees, the specific creak of a certain gate, the taste of bread baked a certain way in the settlement's shared kitchen. By evening, as they prepared to make camp before returning to the palace the following morning, Lyra found herself standing at the edge of the tree line, staring into the deepening shadows of the forest, where her memory had apparently ended 3 years ago. Something happened out there, she said quietly, as Kale joined her at the edge of camp. Something more than a simple attack. I can feel it, even without remembering the details. What makes you say that? Kale asked. Because everyone keeps talking about what happened to me at the Eastern Ridge, like it was one clean, simple event, Lyra said. But nothing about any of this feels clean or simple. Not the attack at the settlement today, not the way that Wolf mentioned my name before retreating, not the strange gap in my memory that conveniently erased exactly the years that apparently made me valuable enough to target. Kale was quiet for a long moment, studying the darkening tree line alongside her. You think the memory loss wasn't purely an accident of the attack? I think, Lyra said slowly, working through the thought as she spoke it aloud for the first time, that someone might have wanted me to forget something specific. Not just anything, something particular that happened during those 3 years, and I think whoever attacked that settlement today is still looking for whatever it is I'm supposed to have forgotten. The idea settled heavily between them, unsettling in its implications. If Lyra was right, then her memory loss was not simply an unfortunate consequence of violence, but a deliberate goal, which meant someone out there believed she knew something dangerous enough to be worth erasing entirely. We need to find out what that is, Kale said finally, before whoever did this decides erasing your memory wasn't enough, and comes back to finish the job properly. Lyra felt a shiver move through her that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Whatever waited buried in those forgotten 3 years, whatever secret her mind had lost along with her memories, it was clearly dangerous enough that someone had already tried once to make sure it stayed buried forever. And if her suspicion was correct, they would not stop trying until they succeeded. The journey back to the palace carried a different weight than the ride out had. Every member of the escort more alert, eyes constantly scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. Lyra rode close beside Kale, her mind turning over the unsettling theory she had voiced the night before, searching for any thread that might help make sense of it. They were perhaps halfway back to the palace, moving through a narrow stretch of forest road, when the attack came. It happened fast, exactly the way the injured wolves at the settlement had described. Shapes burst from the tree line on both sides of the road, moving with coordinated precision that marked them immediately as trained fighters rather than opportunistic bandits. Kale's guards reacted instantly, forming a defensive perimeter around Kale and Lyra, but the attackers had clearly planned their ambush with care, striking at the weakest points in the formation. Lyra did not think. Her body simply moved, old instincts flooding through her with a speed that left no room for hesitation. She was off her horse and into the fray before she fully registered the decision, meeting the first attacker's strike with a defensive block that felt as natural as breathing. Lyra, stay back, Kale shouted, already engaging two attackers of his own, with fierce, controlled efficiency. Not a chance, she called back, ducking beneath a swinging blow, and countering with a strike of her own that sent her opponent stumbling backward. The fight was chaotic, bodies moving fast in the dim forest light, shouts and the clash of blades filling the narrow road. Lyra fought with an instinctive fluidity that surprised even herself, her body clearly remembering skills her mind could not fully account for. Years of border patrol training resurfacing in the heat of the moment, exactly when she needed them most. She caught glimpses of Kale fighting nearby, fierce and controlled, clearly far more skilled than any of the attackers facing him, cutting through their coordinated assault with the confidence of a man who had faced far worse threats before. Watching him move, something tightened in her chest, an instinctive fear for his safety that felt older and deeper than the few days she had known him. One of the attackers broke away from the main fight, moving directly toward Lyra, with clear, deliberate intent, and something in his focused expression told her immediately that this was not random. He knew exactly who she was, and he had come specifically for her. "You should have stayed dead," the attacker snarled, swinging hard toward her. The words struck harder than his blade, confirming everything she had suspected the night before. She deflected his strike, countering fast, driven by a fury she had not expected to feel so intensely. "Dead from what?" she demanded, forcing him backward with a series of quick strikes. "What did I know that was worth trying to erase?" The attacker did not answer, focused entirely on the fight, but his hesitation, however brief, gave Lyra the opening she needed. She disarmed him, with a move that felt instinctive rather than calculated, sending his weapon clattering into the underbrush before pressing her own blade against his throat. "Talk," she demanded, "now." But before he could respond, one of the guards, moving fast to protect his queen, struck the attacker down before he could speak, ending any chance of the answers Lyra desperately needed. The remaining attackers, seeing their numbers dwindling fast against Kale's well-trained guard, retreated into the tree line as quickly as they had appeared, vanishing into the forest, just as the earlier reports had described. The fight ended almost as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the road littered with the aftermath, several guards nursing minor injuries, one attacker dead, the rest gone. Kale reached her side immediately, his expression tight with barely restrained fear, as his eyes swept over her, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Lyra said, though her hands were shaking slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. "He said something before he attacked me. He said I should have stayed dead." Kale's expression darkened further. "Then whatever happened during your original attack, they clearly believe it should have killed you, not simply erased your memory." "Someone wanted me gone entirely," Lyra said slowly, working through the implications. "And when that failed, they've been trying to make sure whatever I knew stayed buried, one way or another." "We need to get back to the palace," Kale said, "now. It's not safe out here. And clearly whatever information you're carrying, even without conscious access to it, makes you a continued target." The rest of the journey passed in tense silence, every member of the party alert for further ambush, though none came. By the time they reached the palace gates, exhaustion and lingering fear had settled heavily over the entire group, and Lyra found herself grateful beyond words for the solid, familiar walls rising up around them. That evening, once the immediate chaos of their return had settled and the injured guards had been tended to, Kale called a private meeting with his most trusted advisors, insisting Lyra be present, despite murmured concerns from a few older council members, about a queen, with no memory participating in sensitive discussions. "She's the one being targeted," Kale said firmly, silencing the murmurs immediately. "She has every right to be part of finding out why." The advisors, a small group of 5 carefully chosen counselors Kale clearly trusted deeply, spent the following hours reviewing everything known about the recent attacks, cross-referencing patterns with old reports of unrest among certain noble factions, particularly those aligned with Garrett's family. "There have been quiet movements within Garrett's holdings for months," one advisor reported, an older woman named Elias, who Kale had described earlier as one of his most trusted counselors. "Increased recruitment, unusual shipments through the eastern trade routes. Nothing overtly treasonous, but enough irregularity to warrant concern." "Do we have proof connecting him to today's attack?" Kale asked. "Not yet," Elias admitted, "but the timing is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Lyra listened to the entire discussion with careful attention, piecing together fragments of political tension she was only beginning to understand, watching Kale navigate the delicate balance between suspicion and the need for solid proof before accusing a powerful noble family of treason. "There's something else," Lyra said finally, once the advisors had exhausted their current information. "The attacker who confronted me directly said I should have stayed dead, not that I should have died in some abstract sense. He phrased it like there was a specific attempt made on my life, one that was meant to succeed completely." "Which means your original attack at the Eastern Ridge wasn't simply about erasing your memory," Elias said slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. "It was a failed assassination." The room fell silent at the weight of that realization, and Lyra felt the full implications settle heavily over her. Someone had tried to kill her outright, and when that attempt had failed, resulting only in memory loss rather than death, they had spent the following weeks trying to finish what they started, first at the border settlement, then on the road itself. "Why?" Lyra asked quietly, more to herself than anyone else in the room. "What could I possibly know, or have done, that made someone want me dead badly enough to try this many times?" Nobody in the room had an answer, and the question hung heavy in the air, unresolved and increasingly urgent, as everyone present understood that whatever secret lay buried in Lyra's missing memories, it was clearly dangerous enough that someone was willing to risk open conflict with the Crown itself to make sure it never resurfaced. In the days following the ambush, the palace settled into a state of careful, watchful tension. Guards doubled at every entrance. Kale's advisors quietly continued gathering evidence against Garrett's faction, though nothing conclusive had yet emerged that would justify open accusation. Lyra, meanwhile, found herself increasingly restless, unable to shake the feeling that the answers she needed were buried somewhere just beyond her reach, hidden in the missing years her mind refused to surrender. She spent hours in the small library, poring over old court records, searching for anything that might connect her to whatever secret had made her a target. Nadia brought meals she barely touched. Dara checked in periodically, growing visibly concerned by the dark circles forming beneath Lyra's eyes. "You need rest," Dara said one afternoon, finding Lyra hunched over a stack of old ledgers. "I need answers," Lyra countered. "Rest can wait." "Answers won't come faster, because you've exhausted yourself chasing them," Dara said, not unkindly. "Your body is still healing. Pushing yourself this hard isn't helping anyone, least of all you." Lyra knew Dara was right, but the restless urgency gnawing at her chest refused to quiet. Something about the missing years felt increasingly close, hovering just at the edge of her awareness, like a word stuck on the tip of her tongue, and the frustration of not being able to grasp it was becoming almost unbearable. That evening, unable to sleep, she wandered the palace gardens alone, the cool night air a welcome relief after hours spent hunched over dusty records. The garden, she had learned, was one of the places she apparently used to frequent often before her memory loss, and she found herself hoping, perhaps foolishly, that simply walking its familiar paths might shake something loose. She was examining a particular cluster of flowers near the garden's edge, the same rare blooms Kale had mentioned she'd insisted on planting from her home settlement, when a fragment surfaced unexpectedly, sharp and sudden, unlike anything she had experienced since waking. A memory, real and vivid and entirely unprompted. She was standing in this exact spot, moonlight falling across the same flowers, Kale beside her, both of them laughing about something she could not quite make out in the fragment, his hand resting warm and familiar against the small of her back. The feeling attached to the memory was overwhelming, warmth and safety and a bone-deep sense of belonging that struck her chest like a physical blow. Lyra gasped, stumbling slightly, one hand reaching out to steady herself against a nearby stone bench. "Lyra." She turned to find Kale approaching, having apparently followed her out into the garden, concern etched across his features at the sight of her sudden distress. "I remembered something," she said, her voice unsteady. "Just now. Us, standing right here. It was real, Kale. I could feel it." His expression shifted immediately, hope and caution mixing together. "What did you see?" "Just a moment," Lyra said, still trying to process the strange, disorienting sensation of a genuine memory surfacing after so many days of nothing but borrowed stories. "Standing here with you, laughing about something, I don't know what, but I remember feeling," She paused, searching for the right word. Safe. Completely safe. Like nothing in the world could touch me as long as you were standing there. Cale crossed the remaining distance between them, close enough now that she could see the raw hope in his eyes, carefully restrained beneath years of practiced control. That's real, he said quietly. That happened, exactly as you described, nearly 2 years ago, shortly after we were bonded. It felt different than everything else you've told me, Lyra admitted. Not like a story I'm learning secondhand, like something that actually happened to me. That's how memories return sometimes, Cale said. Fragments first, feelings before full detail. The healers said it might happen this way, if it happened at all. Standing there in the moonlit garden, the first genuine crack finally forming in the wall of forgotten years, Lyra felt something shift inside her. A quiet, cautious hope beginning to take root where only confusion and frustration had lived before. Tell me more about that night, she said. Everything you remember. Cale's expression softened, and he began to speak, describing the small details of that particular evening, an ordinary night, made significant only by the simple happiness they had shared together. As he spoke, more fragments began surfacing, faint and hazy, but undeniably real, pieces of the memory slotting slowly into place, like scattered puzzle pieces, finally finding their edges. I remember the smell of these flowers, Lyra said slowly, and your laugh. God, I remember your laugh. What else? Cale asked softly, clearly not wanting to push too hard, but desperate to encourage whatever thread had finally begun unraveling. I don't know, Lyra admitted. It's fragile, like trying to hold water in my hands. But it's there, Cale. For the first time since I woke up, something actually feels like mine. They stood together in the garden for a long while after that, Cale, carefully sharing small memories, testing which ones sparked recognition and which ones remained frustratingly blank. Some connected instantly, vivid and real. Others stayed stubbornly out of reach, distant stories about a woman Lyra still could not fully claim as herself. But it was progress, real, undeniable progress, and standing there in the cool night air, with Cale's steady presence beside her, Lyra allowed herself, for the first time since waking into this strange new life, to genuinely believe that the missing years might not be lost forever. Whatever secret is buried in those years, she said quietly, as they finally turned to walk back toward the palace. I think my mind is finally ready to give it up. Slowly, piece by piece. But it's happening. Then we'll face whatever comes with it together, Cale said, his voice steady and certain, in a way that settled something anxious deep in her chest. Whatever it turns out to be. Lyra glanced at him in the moonlight, studying the sincere determination in his expression, and felt something warm bloom quietly in her chest, distinct from the fragile, resurfacing memories, something that felt entirely new and entirely her own, a choice being made in the present rather than a memory being reclaimed from the past. She was choosing to trust him, not because 3 forgotten years demanded it, but because the woman standing in this garden tonight, memory or not, wanted to. The fragments continued returning over the following days, gaining momentum, the way a trickle of water eventually carves a wider path through stone. Small memories surfaced during ordinary moments, triggered by a familiar scent in the kitchen, a particular piece of music drifting from the practice hall, the specific way afternoon light fell across the library floor. Each fragment brought her closer to understanding the woman she had been during those missing 3 years, and slowly, the stranger wearing her face in old portraits began to feel less like someone else entirely. It was during one such quiet afternoon, sorting through old correspondence in the private study she apparently used to favor, that a memory surfaced, sharp and complete, unlike any of the fragile pieces that had come before. She remembered a meeting, late at night, in this very study, with a cloaked figure she could not quite make out clearly, discussing something about the border settlements, about unrest brewing among certain noble families, about a plot forming to destabilize the crown from within. Lyra gasped, the memory crystallizing with sudden, startling clarity. She had known. Before the attack, before her memory loss, she had somehow uncovered evidence of exactly the kind of conspiracy Cale's advisors had been quietly investigating for weeks. She found Cale in the training yard, breathless from the memory's sudden intensity, and pulled him aside immediately. I remember, she said, a meeting, right before I was attacked. I was investigating something, Cale. Some kind of plot against the crown. His expression sharpened immediately, full attention snapping onto her. "What did you find?" "I don't have all of it yet," Lyra admitted, frustration coloring her voice. "But I remember evidence. Documents, maybe. Proof of something involving the Eastern nobles." "Garrett's faction," Cale said, understanding dawning fast. "I think so," Lyra said. "I think that's exactly why they attacked me. Not randomly. Because I had found something that threatened them directly. Something dangerous enough that they needed me silenced before I could bring it to you." The revelation reframed everything that had happened since her memory loss. The attacks, the ambush on the forest road, all of it suddenly making sense within this new understanding. She had not simply been an innocent victim caught in random violence. She had been actively investigating a conspiracy, close enough to real proof that her enemies had decided outright murder was worth the risk. "We need to find whatever evidence you gathered," Cale said. "If it still exists somewhere, it could finally give us the proof needed to move against Garrett's faction properly." They spent the following days searching methodically through Lyra's private belongings, her study, hidden compartments in furniture she apparently favored for storing sensitive documents, anywhere the missing evidence might have been concealed before the attack. The search proved frustrating, turning up nothing conclusive despite hours of careful effort, until Lyra, standing once again in the garden where her first real memory had surfaced, felt another piece click suddenly into place. "The greenhouse," she said suddenly, startling Cale, who had been walking quietly beside her. "There's a hidden space in the greenhouse, behind the flower beds I planted." They moved quickly, urgency propelling them across the garden toward the small greenhouse structure, tucked near its edge. Lyra's hands moved with sudden, certain purpose, memory guiding her fingers to a specific loose stone along the greenhouse's back wall, revealing a small hidden compartment behind it. Inside, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth to protect against moisture, sat a small collection of documents, exactly as her returning memory had promised. Cale carefully unwrapped the bundle, spreading the papers across a nearby potting table, and both of them fell silent as they scanned the contents. Financial records, correspondence between several Eastern nobles, Garrett's name appearing prominently throughout, references to funding movements, weapon shipments, and coordination with what appeared to be a mercenary faction operating in the Northern Territories. "This is it," Cale breathed, disbelief and vindication mixing in his voice. "This is exactly what we needed." "There's more," Lyra said, memory continuing to surface as she studied the documents. "I remember now. I found this because a servant in Garrett's household came to me directly, terrified, wanting to expose the plot, but too afraid to approach the crown himself. He trusted me because I wasn't born to this court. He thought I might actually listen. And you did," Cale said. "You always did. I was going to bring this to you," Lyra continued, the memory sharpening with each passing moment. "I was riding back from meeting the servant, one final time, gathering the last piece of proof, when I was attacked at the Eastern Ridge. They must have discovered what I was doing. The pieces fell together completely now, the entire missing puzzle finally whole. Lyra had uncovered proof of Garrett's treasonous conspiracy, and in the process of gathering final evidence, had been targeted for assassination. Her memory loss, an unintended consequence of an attack, meant to kill her outright, and bury the conspiracy along with her body. "We need to move on this immediately," Cale said, gathering the documents with careful urgency, "before Garrett realizes his attempts have failed, and tries something even more drastic." "What happens now?" Lyra asked, watching him carefully. "Now," Cale said, his expression hardening into something Lyra had not yet seen from him, the cold, controlled fury of a king, finally holding proof of betrayal against his own court. "Now we make sure Garrett faces exactly the consequences his treason deserves." Lyra felt a fierce, protective satisfaction settle over her at his words, some deep instinct, recognizing that whatever fear and confusion the missing years had caused her, she had ultimately spent them fighting for something that mattered, protecting a crown and a kingdom she had somehow come to genuinely believe in, memory or not. Whatever came next, whatever confrontation waited ahead as Garrett's treason finally came to light, Lyra intended to face it standing exactly where she belonged, beside the man whose trust and love she was only now beginning to fully understand and reciprocate. The great hall filled faster than Lyra had ever seen it, word spreading through the palace overnight that the king had summoned an emergency session of the full court. Nobles arrived in various states of hastily assembled formality, murmuring amongst themselves, clearly sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Lyra stood beside Kale on the raised dais, dressed once again in the deep green gown Nadia had insisted suited her, though this time she wore it with none of the earlier uncertainty. Whatever fragile, uncertain woman had woken confused and frightened in an unfamiliar bed weeks ago had been steadily replaced by someone increasingly sure of her place in this world, memories or not. Garrett arrived among the Eastern faction nobles, his expression carrying the same practiced confidence Lyra remembered from their first confrontation, though something flickered uncertainly behind his eyes as he took in the grim, controlled fury radiating from Kale's posture. "You summoned this session rather urgently, Your Majesty," Garrett said, his voice carrying the same careful, testing politeness as before. "I trust there's good reason for pulling the entire court away from their duties." "There is," Kale said, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall, cold and controlled in a way Lyra had not yet witnessed. "Evidence has come to light regarding a conspiracy against the crown. Financial records, correspondence, proof of coordination with mercenary forces operating illegally within our northern territories." A ripple of tension moved through the assembled nobles, whispers rising and falling as everyone processed the weight of the announcement. Garrett's expression tightened, though he maintained his composure with practiced skill. "That's a serious accusation," he said carefully. "I trust you have proof to support it, rather than simple rumor." "I do," Kale said, and at his signal, one of his advisors stepped forward, presenting the recovered documents for the full court to witness. "These documents detail an extensive plot orchestrated to destabilize this crown from within, funded and coordinated by members of this very court." Fluke. Garrett's jaw tightened visibly now, calculation flickering behind his eyes, as he clearly weighed his options. "Documents can be forged," he said finally, "fabricated by anyone wishing to discredit a rival faction." "These were not fabricated," Lyra said, stepping forward, her voice carrying clearly through the tense hall. "I recovered them myself, before the attack that erased my memory. A member of your own household brought them to me, Garrett, terrified of what your faction was planning." Garrett's composure cracked slightly at that, real alarm flashing across his features before he could smooth it away. "This is absurd," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "The Queen herself admits her memory is unreliable. How can anyone trust testimony from a mind that cannot even recall the last 3 years of her own life?" "My memory of those specific events has returned," Lyra said, holding his gaze steadily. "Piece by piece, exactly as it needed to, exactly in time to bring this proof forward. I remember the servant who approached me. I remember gathering this evidence, and I remember being attacked on the road from the eastern ridge, moments after securing the final piece of proof against your conspiracy." The hall had gone utterly silent now, every noble present holding their breath as the confrontation reached its climax. Garrett's eyes darted briefly toward his fellow Eastern nobles, searching for support that visibly failed to materialize, as several of them shifted uncomfortably, clearly unwilling to align themselves publicly with a man facing such damning accusations. "You have no proof I ordered any attack," Garrett said, his voice tightening with desperation now. "We have proof of your conspiracy," Kale said, "and we have testimony from surviving attackers captured following an ambush on the road, an ambush that occurred immediately after this same conspiracy came dangerously close to full exposure." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle fully over the hall. "The pattern speaks clearly enough for itself." Garrett's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight visibly draining from his posture, as he recognized the impossibility of his position. Surrounded by evidence, abandoned by allies unwilling to share his fate, cornered in front of the entire court, there was nowhere left for his careful maneuvering to hide. "Whatever you believe you've found," he said finally, his voice quiet now, stripped of its earlier confidence, "you'll find I am not without resources of my own." "Perhaps," Kale said, "but you will find them considerably diminished, starting today." At Kale's signal, guards moved forward to escort Garrett from the hall, his protests growing increasingly hollow as the reality of his situation fully settled over him. The remaining Eastern nobles, quick to distance themselves from his fallen faction, offered hasty assurances of loyalty to the crown, eager to avoid any association with treason, now fully exposed before the entire court. As the hall slowly emptied, whispers of the confrontation already spreading toward every corner of the palace. Lyra found herself standing quietly beside Kale, the weight of the moment finally settling over her fully, now that the immediate danger had passed. "It's over," she said softly. "This particular threat, yes," Kale said. "Though restoring the Eastern faction's loyalty properly will take considerably longer." He turned to study her carefully, something warm and full of quiet pride shining in his amber eyes. "You did this. Even without your full memory, even facing threats against your own life, you helped bring this conspiracy into the light." "We did this," Lyra corrected gently, "together." Later that evening, standing once again in the garden, where her first genuine memory had surfaced weeks before, Lyra felt the last of the day's tension finally ease from her shoulders. Kale joined her beneath the same cluster of flowers, the moonlight falling exactly as it had in that first returning fragment. "Do you remember everything now?" Kale asked quietly. Lyra considered the question honestly. "Not everything," she admitted. "Some pieces are still missing. But enough has returned that I finally feel like myself again. Or maybe," she paused, searching for the right words, "maybe I've simply become myself again, memories and all, piece by careful piece." "I fell in love with you twice now," Kale said softly. "Once, 3 years ago, before any of this happened. And again these past weeks, watching you rebuild yourself from nothing but instinct and stubborn will." "Which version do you prefer?" Lyra asked, a small, genuine smile touching her mouth for the first time in what felt like ages. "Both," Kale said simply, "because they're the same woman, underneath everything. The one who never bowed to anyone she didn't respect, the one who growled back at a king without even remembering she had any reason not to." Lyra laughed softly at that, the sound easy and unguarded, nothing like the careful, uncertain woman who had woken frightened and confused in an unfamiliar bed weeks before. Whatever the missing years had taken from her, whatever danger had followed her return, she had found her way back to herself, not through memory alone, but through choice, through the stubborn, unshakable core of who she had always been. The Northern Court, having witnessed a queen forget everything and still remain exactly who she was always meant to be, would not soon forget the sight of her standing unafraid before a king, memory or not, growling back without hesitation. And neither would Lyra ever forget, not again, exactly what she was capable of, with or without 3 missing years to remind her.